right. Everybody please rise. I'd like to welcome everybody to the second night of our fiscal year 2019 budget hearings. Tonight, for the Pledge of Allegiance, I'm going to ask the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Jones, to come on up and lead us in the pledge, since tonight is Education Night.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so if you would allow me to play the hero for the moment, because I don't get to do this. But Dr. Jones was kind enough to make the call that Fairfield Public Schools will be closed on Wednesday, March 7, 2018. All afternoon and evening activities will be canceled. I am now a hero to my 11-year-old son. So thank you very much for that courtesy.
Except in June when we go an extra day.
Right. Stop it. So as I mentioned, tonight is Board of Ed night. A programming note, because I guess on social media there's been some discussion over Sherman School, Mill Hill School, when those might be before this board. Dr. Jones and I have talked about this over the last 3 weeks, and the goal here is this. We're going to hear from the, I believe you'd call them demographers, correct? The group that is handling the enrollment projections. We're going to hear a presentation from them on that evening, and then we're going to vote on both Sherman and Mill Hill that evening. We decided that
Tom, I think you need to specify the evening.
Oh, it's April 3rd. Thank you. We decided that we wanted to hear about the enrollment projections so we could make a more intelligent decision regarding the school projects that are pending before us, and I think that was the pleasure of the board that we wanted to hear that information. It could be that we're voting on the budget on the same night, but that's not necessarily certain. We might be voting on the budget the week before, depending on what happens at the Board of Selectmen meeting, and then hearing from the enrollment specialist, let's call them that, on that evening, and voting on Sherman School and on Mill Hill, all on April 3rd. So depending on what happens with the budget vote, it could be a little bit of a longer meeting or whatnot, but I think everybody would agree hearing about the go-forward enrollment projections and seeing that presentation is probably a prudent move before voting on those school building projects. So that's that on April 3rd. I hope that clears anything up right now. And Dr. Jones and I talked about that once again earlier today. If anybody has any questions or concerns from my board, please let me know and we can review those. Otherwise, this evening we're likely to have lots of discussion, lots of questions, a bit of back and forth. It may even get contentious at times. We may even have laughs at a few times. Whatever that is, please don't read into anything. The fact that we ask questions does not mean that we've made decisions. Don't try to interpret those questions as being for or against something. That never works out well for any of us involved. Do any of our board members, Board of Selectmen members, have anything they would like to say at this point? Seeing none, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones. I think you have a presentation, and we'll get out of the way.
Please move the chairs.
Yeah.
Thank you. You want the lights off, Dr. Jones?
Yeah, probably.
Thank you, Charlie.
See if it's on.
I thought you'd enjoy seeing the pictures before I start. It's what we're all about. That's why we're here.
Forgot to turn up the volume.
Well, good evening, Board of Selectmen, and good evening, Board of Finance. It's my pleasure to be here tonight. I'm Dr. Toni Jones, School Superintendent. And I did listen to your remarks the other night when you asked for brevity from all of the departments. So just as we did last year, we've condensed to the longer version that I would normally do for the Board of Ed. And just as a reminder, that full presentation is online if you'd like to watch that half-hour presentation. So first of all, I just would like to remind the public and also share with you the process that we go through. And every year when we finish the budget in the spring, it almost feels like we start all over again, because by September, we are already very well into the budget process. We look at the current budget. We look at all of our staffing adjustments and changes, and those can be changes from when the budget is passed in the spring to changes that happen over the summer months, especially with student growth in particular areas. Looking at estimated fixed cost, what is going to be our required staffing, looking at healthcare and what our anticipation is for that. We meet with every headmaster, we meet with all of our principal teams, elementary, middle, and high school, to talk about what our needs are for the next year. We also meet with all of our department level leaders on what the needs will be in their various departments, as well as look at local, state, and any federal funding information. And as you can imagine, this year, this was probably our biggest challenge, because we didn't have a budget for the largest part of when we were trying to do this work in the fall at the state level. We also look at our new enrollment projection data, and that's done on our October 1 count every year, and we get new projections. In this presentation, we'll talk quickly about revenue and expense. We'll look at some student demographic and enrollment information. What are some of the budget challenges going into 2018, 2019, and then just moving forward to 2020. When we look at our expense and our revenue history, one of the things we want to look at is, first of all, how we spend our dollars. And this doesn't change very much from year to year, and it's one of the challenges of running a school district is we are a people business. So the vast majority of our budget is spent on staff salaries in the dark blue and the benefits. And then you'll see the next two drivers in the budget. If you look at the green, is operations and building and maintenance, and the next one is actually transportation. All of those we have very little control over. This is a slide that Fairfield has used for several years just to look at how we are funded with our per pupil expenditure across Fairfield County. Now, last year and then again this year, I had several questions after we looked at this slide in the first presentation in January. What you're seeing here are particular districts, and these are ones that, from a school perspective, we are most likely to compare ourselves with. And if we were just funded at the average for those districts in Fairfield County, we would have about $20 million more dollars in our budget. And it's a pretty big number. And I think it says a lot to how great our staff really do at running extremely efficiently and getting great results. But what I've added, just two more slides, and again, this is at the request of people in the public. If you'll look at this one, this is what would be considered all of Southern Fairfield County. And the two other questions that in the last year I have received is, well, how does our per pupil stack up when we look at the DIRG? And that means your district reference group. And that's not something we create. That's looking at the demographic aspect. A being the wealthiest community. And you can see down on the lower level where you have G's and H's, considerably less wealthy communities. And then down on the bottom, this is the Anglic, and that's again a question that I get a lot. Well, how does that compare when we look at our per pupil? Again, at a more detailed look. And then we did one more slide, which was Southern County, Gold Coast. And again, this is trying to answer questions we get in the community. And this is actually based off of Southern Fairfield County according to Forbes, because we wanted to find who is the reference marker, why we would use these particular school districts. And again, where we are, this is the Southern Fairfield County, and this is your average. We are very cognizant in this budget, obviously, that our educational cost sharing has been reduced to the town. That money flows through the town to the tune of about $2.6 million. And from the educational standpoint, when I talk to our PTA, I try to reference that in teachers, and that helps them understand that that's the equivalent of 35 full-time teachers. So the money that we have lost from the state is the equivalent to all of our classroom teachers, actually a few more, equivalent to Burr Elementary. And that's happened pretty much in the last 24 months. So what are we doing as a school district to offset that ECS of $2.6 million? These are just a sample of 4 items. One is we've increased our pre-K tuition in the 18-19 budget. Going into this school year and going into next school year, we've consolidated 2 bus routes, did not add a third, so we are down 3 bus routes. We have also increased billable cost in special education tuition to the tune of $291,000. And then I think Board of Finance and obviously Board of Selectmen are very aware what the staff have done on the insurance side. And had we not made that change with our insurance, we would have needed an additional $5 million in our budget. If we look at some of our student demographic and enrollment information, these are our numbers on the left, have 10,100 students. One number that people often forget to count are our magnet and our outplaced students, because they still have a cost to Fairfield. So when you look at the total number of students that we fund, we do want to talk about those students as well. One of the challenges we're seeing from the educational standpoint is obviously our English learner and making sure that we have great programming for those students. Our ELL students, as you'll see, the number is climbing. In 13-14, it was 214 students. 17-18, current year is 261. Now, it looks like we only grew by 10 students from last year to this year, but the reality is that 52 of those were actually new to Fairfield, even though we only had a net gain of 10. And what that means is a large portion of those students are moving in and moving out, which adds another layer of challenge for our English language programming. If you look at our students who are eligible for free and reduced price meals, that's right at that 8.9%. That's relatively low for the state. The state average is 38%. That impacts us on things like grants. There are many grants that we're not eligible for because we don't have a high free and reduced ratio. Also, our students with disability, we're sitting right at that 11.2. State average is climbing right to 14%. That means our staff are doing a tremendous job of meeting the needs of our students and intervening where we're not necessarily going through the special education process, perhaps for every parent that might have thought they would need that. We also have a graduation rate that continues to climb. If you look at 16 and 17, and in Fairfield we should be extremely proud of that as well. It's not an easy thing to do, to make sure that every student actually graduates, because sometimes it's just a matter of a student who moves and you can't find them in the database. It doesn't necessarily always mean that somebody didn't graduate high school. If you look at our 15-year historic enrollment, what you're seeing is the trend going into 18-19, and by 18-19 we will fall slightly, but you'll see it's very, very slight. We're staying very, very stable as a whole system. This is actually a chart that was new for us this year, and it is in your budget book as well. There's a lot going on when you look at this, and it's one of those that you almost have to study. But this is going back to 1960, and it takes us all the way through our projection of 2027. And one of the reasons we wanted to look at this data, there was a lot of discussion about, well, we're losing student enrollment as though it's a huge big trough. And we have a lot of people in town that remember this time period, which is just the 80s. It's not that long ago for those of us that are my age. But the trough is nothing like it was back then. And I think it's important for us to be able to see that. The other thing that's reflected on here, which we have discussed, is looking at schools as we've worked with Malone and McBroom, and again, they'll be presenting for you, but what has happened with our school buildings over time as well. And at one time, we did have 15 elementaries. And you can see that as the trough came down, we started getting rid of our schools, our elementary schools, taking those offline. Some of them, we realized our enrollment was peaking again. We tried to get our schools adequate for our enrollment. But what happened in this time period is we ended up, which you know, with 60 or 70 trailers in the district to accommodate, because you can't build that fast. So we're being very thoughtful about what's happening right here, because you're not seeing huge dips. So does that have impacts for how many schools you have? The other thing is just going back to the 60s and understanding that we had 2 high schools for a very long time. We actually had 1 high school for a short time. And a lot of people only remember this period in here. If we look at our grade-by-grade projections, this is all in our Malone and McBroom information if you want details. This is what the graph looks like for elementary. This is K-5, and right now this is that trough period, but what you're going to see is we go right back up again. So as a school board, budgeting for everything that we do, we have to be very thoughtful that just literally by 2024, we're already larger than we will be next year. This is our middle school trend line, and again, if you want the detailed information, it's online. This is what our middle school trend line looks like. In 18-19, we have a large 7th grade. They're with us this year in 6th grade, so you'll see a spike in students. They'll be with us in 8th grade. Then our middle school will go down for a short period before it starts going back up again. And what you'll see in the high school is that high school right now is going to stay high. We've got our large middle school that will come to high school. When high school starts going back down again, that's when elementary is starting to go back up, middle school starting to go back up for enrollment. So if we look at what we did for building the budget, there are 5, and this is not meant to be inclusive, it's not everything that's in our budget, fixed costs that we know are important to consider when we started building the budget. Our contracted salaries, that's just all of our salaries. Utilities are up for 18 and 19. Benefits, and that's not unusual to see an increase in benefits. Transportation cost goes up a percentage almost every year. And then tuition, and primarily that tuition is special education tuition. Just like any of you who have young people in college, they tend to raise tuition almost every year. And it doesn't matter whether it's K-12 or K-16, the same thing happens. And the total of the fixed cost is about $4.8 million. We also had some new budget challenges this year. And these are items that after the budget was passed last year that we had to mitigate going into the 17-18 year. We had special education outplacement cost, $729,000 that was unplanned. We have a Medicaid position, which after the budget was passed in the fall, this was required to be in place by December 1 as part of that budget, and it's a position that will help file for Medicaid reimbursement. We also had current CLC and ECC classes which needed to be added, and again, this was for student enrollment. We had 2 of our complex learner cohort classes and 1 early childhood. All 3 of those are special needs to the tune of about $400,000. We also had a team mentoring that was unanticipated. That was also as a result of something that was in the budget that was unfunded, but the mandate is there that we must do that. And that number is actually probably going to be closer to $40,000 by the time we get to the end of the year. So if you look at our budget challenges, fixed cost and the challenges, that's about $6 million just for those items to cover unplanned expenses and fixed cost. So if we look at budget reductions and adjustments, if you'll remember, one of the things we really looked closely at last year, and thank you to Dr. Rasmussen for that, is our retirement analysis. And last year we didn't have a graph to show you, and I tried to articulate it, but this year this is in your budget book, where you can actually look at the percentage that somebody is going to retire, what's the likelihood, and we're looking at the age from 50 all the way through 90. And of course, as people get older, you know, it increases that they're going to retire. Then we go in and we actually look at our actual staff and we apply that analysis. And then we take those percentages that they're likely to retire, and this year we are planned for 19 retirements. But it's a very detailed analysis, which is a little different than we used to do. And last year, again, credit to Dr. Rasmussen, he was 100% correct. This year, I simply don't know. We have so many things going on right now. Teachers are leaving their positions across the country for a variety of reasons, for morale, just in general right now it's hard to be a teacher. Will that impact people who are closer to retirement? We may have more retirements, but then economically we also could see less. So this is going to be an interesting year to see if our analysis still works. If you look at our budget at a glance, this is our request this year. You're looking at staff salaries at that total 1.1%. And again, this is in the budget book, and you can actually look at those. And if you want more details, certainly all the detail is in the budget. But again, the total request this year is at 3.1%, with an increase of 3.2. And again, just as a reminder, we had over $6 million just in fixed cost and those challenges that we don't control. And so we share with you that what is in our budget is what we absolutely need to run our school system and stay the great system that we are. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Can we turn off the light up above? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jones.
No, but we can get them. Yeah.
Before we move on, does anybody have any questions based on the information presented in the presentation by the superintendent? Mr. Tiniak.
One basic question. Thank you for the presentation. It was very good. There was a slide early on about billable special education. Can you just describe that program for me? And I guess my question would be, what's the total percentage we actually bill if we increased? Is there decisions being made not to take it to the maximum? Where are we with that? If you can describe that in a little depth, please.
Let me find the page in the budget book that will help you. Thank you. So if you look on page 17, right in the center section, sorry, I'm going to move this over. What you'll see is special education. Sorry, I'm at the wrong. Page 18, please. Next one over. If you see where it says other sources at the top, you'll see where it says special education revenue from other districts. In the past, and this has probably been more impactful for open choice students than it has been for Child and Family Services or DDS. But if we had a student who had a special education cost, we were only billing if it was over that $17,000 or $18,000, whatever our per pupil amount was each year. We are allowed to bill over $3,000, and so we made an adjustment last year, and actually at the end of the year did all of our billable cost. And it takes a tremendous amount of time to do that because it's every single service. And so we have made that adjustment this year as well in the budget. So that's why you'll see last year it had a 0, and then at the end of the year when we were able to bill, it was $291,000. It's a change in process.
Okay. And that's going to remain for this year as well?
It will remain for, yes, unless they change the law.
Thank you.
Tom, one clarification here.
Yep, please go right ahead.
Dr. Jones, on the student population, there was one slide where you detailed out the magnet schools and some other, it totaled like 10,100. And there was an earlier slide that came in at like 9,800 or something. I was just wondering what the difference was between the two.
Yeah, on the slide that you said, and when I pointed out down on the bottom, it shows our students who are in magnet schools in Bridgeport, which there are 82 of those that aren't on how many children are going to be in our seats versus how many children total as a system do we actually pay for. And they're different costs, obviously, for a magnet student, and then also our outplay students, which are 102. But they're not children, if you're talking about school capacity, that will show up on a chart of how many seats do you need for students in your schools, because they have seats in other schools in the region.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions based on the superintendent's presentation? Yeah, go ahead, John.
Can we get like your presentation in hard copy? Yeah.
Yes, and we'll get copies for you.
Thank you. That's all.
All right. One comment that you made, and I just want to make sure I understand it correctly, because I want to make sure we did the right thing. With the savings in the $5 million savings in benefits, medical costs, how is that $5 million calculated? What is that a comparison of and to?
We actually have Aon who does our calculations and did our calculations,
Yep.
and there is a presentation we can give you where they've actually looked at that as well, and they look at what our cost would have been had we not switched to Connecticut 2.0. And I'm sure that's what Mrs. Bunsell's trying to pull out of her bag.
So it's really, it's, what it is it's cost avoidance.
Right, it's cost of, if we had not changed carriers, that is the amount we would have needed in
That's
this
what they
year's
say
budget.
that we would have needed, because if they
That's
took
correct.
our plan and tried to price it out, they're saying that that's, what percentage increase would have been year over year?
Sorry, what percentage what?
If we had stayed with the old plan, what would that increase have been year over year?
5.2?
So we would add it's got to be more than that, no?
Yeah, no, it's more than that.
Because your total benefits here, you're saying.
Do you mean million or percent year to year?
Percent. No, that's not, no. That's only one piece of it.
5.2 million would have been the dollars. The percent would have been much higher because your total benefits are only at 23 million.
Yeah.
So you're saying you would have had over a 20% increase year over year in medical costs?
16%, I think it's,
16%?
If I can perhaps coach an answer, the line for health benefits for next year is what?
22 million?
So it's 5 million versus 22 million.
Right.
Whatever
Which
that
is not 16,
percentage is.
right?
Hmm?
Which is not 16%, right? It's a higher percentage.
Oh, okay, that's their calculation based on what it would have been, not budget to budget. You're looking for budget to budget?
No, I'm saying that your budget is 23.9 million was this year's actual, right? Is that what, or 26.029 million, is that right?
This is on page 31.
I'm just looking at benefits in general.
There's other items.
Okay.
Our 18-19 budget?
Well, you're saying it was 21 million. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Here's what I'm trying to get to. You're saying that it was 21 million this year, right? The 2018 budget is 21 million. You're saying that we cost avoided 5.2 million, right?
And that's from the time we were self-insured, not from last year, but self-insured. Had
Well,
we
then
not gone self-insured, this coming budget would have been $5 million higher.
Well, that doesn't make any sense to me. It should be from year over year, and it should be as.
You're taking the delta off an old number.
Right, you're taking the delta off an old number, and you're not subtracting out what the increase has been year over year anyway.
Now, that's wrong.
So you're grossing everything up.
We're reporting what Aon reported to us, yeah.
Well, what I'm saying is it's not a valid statistic because you're comparing apples and oranges, at least from the way it's being described. And you're saying that, because what I want to know is, if we hadn't done this, last year we paid 21,237,000, right? You're saying this year, you're saying that we saved 5.2 million, and in your calculation, you're subtracting that 5.2 million, saying, hey, look what we saved. You didn't save that in 1 year.
Not in 1 year, no.
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 So just to.
Right, it's a total savings over a several-year period now.
Correct.
That we're into this.
Right,
Correct.
right.
Okay,
From
so
the
I want to
beginning.
know what we saved year over year,
'Cause
from last year to this year.
what you're
right?
describing, Mr. Chairman, the number this year would have been 27 million.
Right,
That's the way it looked on the slides, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. What would the 22 million number been had you not made the change?
Yeah, I think we'll probably need to take your question and make sure Aon answers that correctly for you.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have one sheet that shows the self-insured for 17-18 would have been 32.1, where the state plan 2.0 as of October 1st was 29, just for this school year.
so that's 3 million, not 5 million.
Yeah, right, and we were saying over the time that we've changed insurance.
Right, I
But
just wanna
we'll
make
get
sure we're
Aon to
doing-
answer that for you.
Yeah, that'd be perfect if we could do that. And because I want to make sure the teachers are treated fairly too, right? I know they went, Dr. Title led the initiative and got everybody to go with the state plan, right? There was the teachers, the people on the plan also got a personal savings by switching to the plan, correct? Because their portion of the premiums would have gone up as well by the same percentage as the towns went up. Is that true? I want to make sure I understand that.
What their percentage.
Well, when the rates are lower, their cost share is lower. If
Right, so there was, both, I want, and this is not a criticism, again, don't read into the question. Both sides benefited by this health insurance plan because the town saved money and the teachers saved money out of their own pockets by moving to this plan.
I think I would ask you to think of the third component of it. In all insurances, the insurance company is not saying, well, we'll just charge you less money and we'll not have as much money in the till to pay benefits. Essentially, over the last decade, insurance has been about transferring risk from the insurance company and the employer to the employee, whether it's co-insurance, whether it's co-pays, whether it's changing the benefits.
I'm very familiar with that.
Okay, so
That's not
therefore,
my point.
the employees got a proportionate share in the benefit reduction in terms of the premium cost.
Right.
But they assumed more risk in the process.
So does everybody.
Yeah,
So that's for the last decade, and it's even worse in the private sector.
yeah, I just want to make sure
Yeah,
that
but my point
that's
is,
understood.
My point is, and again, it's not a criticism, it's not anything. The employees also received a reduction in expense.
Correct.
By moving to the plan. So it was a good thing for them in terms of a reduction of their expense. That's all, because their premium went down too. It was a win-win scenario. It was worked out for everybody. Okay. Anybody else on the presentation? Can we then turn to, I love to call it the Wally Flynn schedule. It's page 27, and thank you for always producing this schedule. And I also want to thank everybody. Dr. Jones, you went very quickly through the budget process. But that is a very long process that is done bottom up, and we greatly appreciate the time and effort that you and your team put into that budget process every year, as well as the Board of Education in reviewing it. So I didn't want to let that go unsaid. Let's turn to page 27, which, as I referred to, this Wally Flynn who was a former member of our board, used to say this was the best page, essentially, to start reviewing the Board of Ed budget. I found him annually to be correct, because it goes down the major categories of expenses, and then we can dive in where anybody sees the need. Is everybody okay with starting there? Do we have any issues with that? Anybody on the Board of Selectmen have an issue with that? All right. So the first line item is staff salaries. And does anybody have any questions on staff salaries? Let's go right down this. Ms. Esma, please.
Good evening. I think that first line is pretty indicative to me, or at least it seems to reflect what was said at the RTM meeting where the contract was voted on, and that is that the actual, I mean, you can call it at 8%, which was said quite a bit, but the actual here shows you have about a 1% to 1.5% per year increase, and that's attrition and retirements. So that's an aggregate, like a net number. So that's how I'm reading that, correct? Thank you.
What was the budget, in that contract, what was the contractual increase in the first year of the budget? Or the first year of the contract?
1.55.
Okay, so that's 1.5. What's it going up by here?
Well,
That line is aggregate salaries of all employees, not just teachers.
Okay, but what's it going up by? 1.77?
budget to budget, yes.
Okay, so it's going up by 1.77. Next year, there'll be a higher increase of teacher salaries, correct? Because of the contract. The contract called for like a 1.5 this year. And then wasn't it something like a 2.5 next year?
Yeah. There's a page.
And then 3 point something the following year, right? So, I mean, this is in line with what the contract calls for.
Will that, but there may be an adjustment for, again, teachers who leave, retire, or whatever other movement there is among the teaching staff.
Is that factored into this number?
No?
So there's no assumptions made
Well-
in here for teacher retirements and teachers leaving?
Teachers' retirements and staff replacement, yes.
So there is. So that's already factored into this number?
Right, but it will change based on,
The actual?
right.
Right. So the actual will change, but in this budget, you factored in what you would refer to as churn.
Right. 19 retirements.
Right. So you're factored in 19 retirements. So what we're saying is we signed a contract that said we're going to have an increase in salaries of 1-point-something%. We've got a budget here that shows an increase of 1-point-something%. And this budget factors in the churn that you were talking about.
Yes.
Okay. Up to 19 salaries. Okay.
What's year 2 and 3 again of the contract?
If you look on
Page
page
136.
136,
Thank you for
I
that.
think you'll find all of the contracts are shown.
Thank you very much. Okay. What other questions do we have on staff salaries? Is there Mr. Brown?
Going back to your presentation, the Medicaid staff, first, who made that decision? You said it was mandated.
You want the exact name?
Yeah, I really would, actually, but you probably don't have that. But does the state, is that a state or federal or?
That was when the state budget passed. You know how it had all those things in there and people weren't real sure what was in there? That was one that was put into the budget and when it passed. Now, I will say, you know, it is an area that I think is going to be a good thing for us in the long run. It was not easy to be told to do that and have somebody in place to start working in that direction by December 1st. Very fast timeline, but it could have benefits where it could generate some revenue for the school district and the town. So, and Mr. Mancusi, our Director of Special Education, Executive Director of Special Ed, did Medicaid billing in his previous district. So we're very fortunate that he has experience with this as well. But I think it's going to be a benefit in the long run. We just weren't prepared for it this year, so it's still an additional expense, unplanned.
Which is part of the point, is the state throws things at us, at our district, that we're not prepared for or sure, or we really don't know what they're thinking. I mean, have you gone up there and talked to them and had any further discussion about what else they might decide that might be, as far as additional staff that will be beneficial in their mind to our district?
We don't talk so much about staff. It tends to be more about mandates and trying to make sure when somebody puts something forward that we know is going to have a huge cost driver and we don't feel like it's going to benefit staff or children, making sure that we are keeping up with that. And that's one reason our state organizations are so important. Not only our School Board Association, Superintendent Association, they watch all of that legislation and what's happening for us and give us periodic updates so that when something is happening, usually people know. This fall was very interesting because it was so hard to follow from week to week. And like the teams mentoring, nobody knew that was really in the budget. Nobody caught that, that it was not funded until we probably found out about it 3 weeks, month later, after the budget had passed. So that can happen, and I think it's part of moving quickly in uncharted waters.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Yes, we'll go to Mr. Tetra, and then we'll go to Mr. Mottola.
So I could, going back to insurance for a moment, and I guess page 31 perhaps. There's the budget number of 21 million and change for fiscal 18, and the proposed budget of 22 million and change for fiscal 19. Now, the fiscal 19 budget is based on the premiums, correct? Okay, and when we went through fiscal 18, as we identified at the quarterly review, we had about $1 million in savings. So does that mean the 21 million change from an actual standpoint would be closer to $20 million in change?
As far as what projected actual?
The budget number. We basically said we saved $1 million in actuals because we made that October change.
Yep.
You were good enough to switch to that, so thank you for that. Saved about $1 million. So the budget number from an actual standpoint for 18 would be about $1 million lower than this budget.
Correct. That's on page 71.
And I might just point out, we did have
Is that different
I'm
than
sorry.
page 31 for some, is that?
I just want to point out very quickly, we did add on that far left-hand column, which is new this year, the page numbers. So when you want to look at the detail, it actually gives you the page number where to go to. And again, so when you're looking on that page 31, that far left-hand column, I think that could be helpful for you if you hadn't noticed.
Okay,
Clearly, we
which
didn't-
which detail line would you like me to look at?
Okay, 201, health insurance, middle of the page.
Okay.
So you'll see the 17-18 budget, 21,237,000, and then 2 columns over, the 17-18 estimated expenditure, the 20 million you're talking about.
Okay. So that means our actual cost for this year was 20,200,000.
Right,
As best we can tell at this point in the year. I realize it's not over yet.
right.
All right. Then our proposed item for next year is 22 million.
Correct.
So our proposed budget over actual is 22 million versus 20 million, which would be closer to a 10% increase.
I think you're actually saying it's a 7% in this description, right?
We budgeted 7, yes.
We've been advised by the state that the premiums probably will go up 7%. We don't get that number until later in the spring, but that's what we have budgeted.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we budgeted 7% over where we were actually, but the increase over last year's, the current budget was 3.7%?
Correct.
Roughly half that. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Can we go back just for, can we go back to staff for a moment, and let's stay on staff, and then we can go to benefits? I think, Mr. Mottola, you had a question? Was it related to the staff
It's
line?
kind of staff-oriented. On page 9 of your budget book, where you talk about professional development, the Public Act, and it says reduces the amount of mandatory training requirements for all staff, and it's the effective date is in place, and you say cost saving over time and professional development expenses. Are any savings reflected in this budget for that?
Each year, we look at what professional development we need. So when you have mandated professional development, it really takes away from literacy or mathematics or other things that we would normally be doing, or technology. So those savings get put right back into generally professional development that we feel staff need for next year. Like Next Generation Science Standard is a prime example. That's going to be a big area for us next year.
All right, thank you.
Any other staff-related questions? Can I ask, do you have in here, and my apologies, I just can't find it, kind of a roll forward of staff numbers, of number of staff? Because it's driven by 2 things, rate and volume. So I want to know the volume of staff members year over year.
Yeah, there's a page at the end.
And I was trying to find it, and unfortunately, and I'm sure it's just me, I can't find
It's
it.
generally one of the pages, one at the end of the book, but let's find the index, and that will tell us.
Yeah,
Is he talking about this one?
I want to understand that. Is it, yeah, all the way in the back here?
Staffing by department.
Do we have a total?
137,
137 the total? Thank you, by the way.
Yeah, essentially, pages 137 through 147 have the staff changes in a variety of different formats.
Yeah, can you walk us, can you step us through that? So we have, can you talk to us about the staff changes? Just walk us through these couple of, what's going on here?
So in terms of year-over-year total, I would direct you to page
you.
147, which has the grand totals for staffing on the bottom of it,
Yep.
which I think answers the question you just asked, but I can go back to 138 and walk through the staffing changes there, if you'd like.
Can we do that? Can we understand what's, just tell us what's going on with volume. Tell us what's going on with enrollment, and then tell us what's going on with the staff changes.
With
if you don't
enrollment?
mind. Yeah, please.
So, looking at enrollment for next year, we're assuming that it is generally going to be around the same that it was this year. with that in mind, we really looked at where our needs are for the students that we currently have.
Yep.
And looked at what we can be doing to improve the programming we have for those students. So if you look on page 138, the additional staff there, it's a total net of 9.4 new teachers, almost all of which, around 7.3 FTE, are going to special education needs for students with the intensive support social worker. Those 5 positions, if you look on the right-hand column under certified staff additions, which is the upper part of the green. So the intensive support social worker, you'll note the asterisks there, that those are 5 positions that we're currently contracting for outside of internal staff. So those are 5 people we're currently paying, but we're not paying them as our internal staff members. So that's essentially a wash in terms of money. It's 5 new positions, but it's not 5 new positions worth of money. That's money that we've moved over from the special education portion of the budget.
Well, hold on, though. If you change them from outside consultants to staff, then you take on the obligation of all their benefits as well as their retiree benefits.
Sure.
So that calculation has been done to say that's a wash?
Essentially, yes. It's a $450,000 contract that we currently have.
Okay, but how much is it? That's an annual thing. When you do the lifetime value of these people and say we're making them employees as opposed to contractors, are we still sure that's a wash?
Essentially, yes, we are.
Can we see that analysis?
Sure.
That shows
Pension is on the state.
what was done?
Pension is on the state.
So we,
Why would that be a wash? Because you would anticipate you'd have to contract that work out year after year after year? Is that the reason?
yeah, correct.
And that expense would go up every year?
Correct. And it has gone up every year.
Okay.
Yeah, but what happens when you do that, and this is what I'm curious as, right? When somebody retires, you're still going to have to pay them, but you're going to have to replace the position. Right? So it can't just be, hey, each year we're paying this. It's got to be, hey, each year we're paying this. And then when we retire,
Bring someone else in.
we're going to bring somebody else in, and we're going to have 20 years of paying benefits and retirement costs for that person. So all I'm saying is it's got to be a holistic, because this is the opposite of a lot of ways other organizations are going where they're outsourcing.
Right.
So they don't have that obligation. Right? Ken, this is Marty.
So that begs the question, why are you doing this? Is there
Right.
some reason that you want
Exactly.
consistency,
And there is,
et cetera,
absolutely.
for the students and the teachers, parents, et cetera?
If I might just interject, there are no retirement costs because
good.
these are certified staff. So
Okay.
they're under the state teachers' retirement, which is fully funded by their contributions.
Yeah, but we pay that as well. I mean, and the state is trying to push that down to us right now.
Not yet, yeah.
Right. But I mean, that's not a free lunch. Okay.
I'll address the
Right, exactly.
I'll address the programming aspect. We have a program that we put in, I believe this is our 3rd year, called ESS, and you may have heard about that if you've watched the budget cycle over the last 2 years. And when we put that in, it was to be able to address more significant social emotional needs for our high school students. And as you know, each year, one challenge for us has been our outplacements. And our average tuition cost is right around $112,000. So when you look at what it costs to build your own program, it can have huge benefits for our students, not only to be able to have programming that keeps them with us, but that also in the long term we can service more students. And with ESS was a program we had been contracted with. We have decided to build our own program because we feel like the quality of service is going to be greatly increased for our families, for our students. Our staff overwhelmingly in this 3rd year really wanted to build this program, and we're very excited about it. Mr. Mancusi, do you want to add?
Yes. Hi, my name is Rob Mancusi. I'm the Executive Director of Special Education.
Welcome, by the way.
Thank you very much. I'm enjoying my time
right?
at Fairfield. Yes. We have chosen to no longer outsource for ESS services. We have significant social emotional needs throughout our district, and this is particularly addressing the needs of our high school population. Dr. Jones is correct. The cost of outplacements is increasing, just like all special education costs. Our staff and our families, I think, believe that we can provide a collaborative program that exceeds what we're providing now in district. We have contracted with consultants clinical psychological consultants from the L Child Study Center. We're contracted with a psychiatric consultant through Yale Child Study Center to support the social and emotional needs of our high school students, and we've also contracted with an executive functioning coach, Dr. Peg Dawson, who is an expert in the field to support students' academic growth. We believe the program that we are going to be delivering next year is going to be an improvement over what we're delivering now. And I will say we are not the only district that is looking at creating in-district programs versus contracted services.
So as part of the financial analysis, and I'll go right to you, Mrs. Martin, that we're going to have less outplacements?
We're hoping the result of this is we're going to be able to maintain students within the Fairfield Public Schools.
So does that mean there's going to be less outplacements?
I can't say there's going to be less outplacements. What I can say is I think we're going to be better equipped to meet the significant social and emotional needs of our students at Fairfield Ludlow High School and Fairfield Ward High School. Obviously, there's a continuum of services for special education. There's never going to be a time where we're not going to consider outplacement. Our hope is that the program that we are developing is going to decrease the amount of outplacements for students with significant social, emotional, and mental health needs.
Mrs. Martin, you got a question?
It's not a question as much as a comment, which is that there's been so much discussion around school security. So you may think that this is kind of an apples and oranges issue, but really there's been a lot of discussion about the need to support high school students younger than high school, in terms of their emotional needs. People have talked about, putting more police officers in the schools, et cetera, but really there's also been discussion about the need for social workers to meet with children and young adults and make sure they have what they need in terms of feeling safe and secure. So I kind of see this running in parallel in terms of giving the students and the staff what they need in terms of feeling safe and being safe.
Yeah, I agree, and I would just comment, in this budget, the board was kind enough to support social emotional initiatives that start at the elementary level, continued through the middle school level, and obviously into the high school level that we just explained.
Are the number of students being serviced by these, with these issues growing as a percentage of the enrollment?
The mental health needs of our student population is increasing. And I don't think that's new to Fairfield. I think it's everywhere you go. When I go to my Fairfield County Director of Special Ed meetings, this is a topic of conversation at almost every meeting on how to best meet the needs of our students, our social emotional needs.
Okay. Mr. Mottola?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the hope is by bringing more students in-house, the hope is you're going to give them better service and hopefully save some money. That's the hope. You can't guarantee that, I understand that. And you're always going to have some need for some outplacement. That's never, ever going to go away, correct?
Correct.
All right. And when, are you doing that now, or what's the timetable to really?
Right. In terms of program development?
Right.
Right now, we are, we have our contracted service providers, our consultants on board with us. We have collected, input from our parents, input from our students in terms of the strengths of the current program, things that they would like to see expanded upon to further support them. We have a calendar that we've charted out for the rest of the year. We're going to be starting, hopefully, interviews next week and identifying, staff that will be filling these positions.
Okay. And that staff's reflected in next year's budget, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions on this specific topic? Mrs. Smith, please.
What is a reasonable period of time to judge the efficacy of a program like this? So if we're coming online, there are other districts who have already made this transition. Is there any data available, or what would your...
What I would say, in my opinion, the best, indicator of the success of this program over time is the number of students that enter the program and that we're able to successfully maintain and, you know, will progress on their IEP goals and objectives or within their public school, within their home school. So the number of students that we're able to service and maintain in the Fairfield Public Schools.
If it's appropriate to this discussion, what is the biggest driver of this trend, would you say? I mean,
There's significant student mental health needs that need to be addressed, and I will say we are very fortunate in Fairfield to have the resources that we have to be able to develop programs like this. I came from a community where we didn't have these resources, but we had the need. So it's an exciting time for the special ed department. It's an exciting time for our staff. You know, our staff is very committed to working with our families to the benefit of our students.
so just more stress on kids?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mr. Brown?
The consultant that we were using, when is that contract end, or are using? Is
Well,
it
those are annual contracts. They start July 1st and then we'll go through
annual
June 30th.
contracts? Okay,
Yeah.
and where would it be in the budget?
Oh, the
book?
current one, I'm sorry, ends June 30th.
Okay. And for the current year, where was that cost?
That was in the consultation services I don't know the exact account number, but it was in consultations. Hold on, I'll find it. I know where it is.
Page 33?
Okay, page 33. Under Pupil Personnel Services.
So under 303? If this-
$450,000 that was in that is in that account for this year to pay for the contracted services is being shifted to salaries to pay for the 5 staff that we're going to be hiring.
But this number is still going up considerably after that. and that's-
Because we have other program initiatives.
I see it below.
Yeah.
We can talk about them when we get there.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Staffing? Before
Yeah,
we leave?
still staffing. I have one on this, if I could
Go
follow
ahead,
up.
yeah,
Doug.
please.
Yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I do just want to point out one change, and I think it's a big change that I just want to make you aware of in the budget this year and the way we have applied our excess cost for special education. Generally, that would have been spread out through several different sub-accounts. And this year, we've taken excess costs, we've applied it all to the tuition account. So it's very easy to see. When we get to next year, it'll be really easy, because when you look at a line item like the one we're talking about on number 7, would be page 72, but on page 33, 510,000 of that 719 is excess cost.
I see that.
Okay, and so in the past, that excess cost would have made that artificially look
This is a
low.
reclassification, is what you're saying, year over year. And going forward, we'll just be looking at it year over year.
And it shows up in different accounts this year, where it can look like an account has grown quite a bit as far as the expense, but it's because the excess cost is not being applied there. It's all, you'll see it in the tuition account.
Yeah. I'm going to ask a question, and it's, again, do not read into the question. I'm trying to understand it. You're right. What you said is we are very fortunate as a community that we can provide these services, and we have historically provided some very good services to people that need it, right? My question would be, where does that line stop between us providing those services and those families using their own medical insurance to get those services provided for those kids, or those consultations provided for those kids? You know, where is that line? What are we doing? Do we go over that line? Is that a concern for us going over that line? Because that's not our role in some regards.
What I will say is for the students in which we're speaking about for this program, we do work with families. We do work with community agencies to provide wraparound services. Parents do access their private insurance for private, therapists or family therapists or psychiatric consultations that they seek on their own.
Okay, so does that mean we're going over the line of what we're required to provide? Or are we stopping at what we're required to provide and then their own personal situation takes
I
up?
think we're required to provide appropriate programming under the law, under the IDEA. I think we do an excellent job of that. I also think we do an excellent job of working with families to help them access community resources.
I think that's absolutely correct that we do an excellent job. That's not what I'm asking.
I don't think we cross the line. I think we are very responsible, but we're going to do what we need to do to appropriately program for a student and to help a family.
Go ahead.
And it's my understanding that if a student's academic success is compromised in any way by their mental health, then the school is under the obligation of providing services in the school to make them succeed, and that's the point of these services. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And we stop there. That's what our responsibility is.
We meet our federal obligations under the IDEA to appropriately program for students with disabilities or students suspected of disabilities.
So does that mean that the last place you came from that didn't have as many resources did not hit their federally required?
Can I actually answer that? Because I think what we are very well aware of is I think if you look at this whole southern Gold Coast, you'll find all of our school districts are very similar. And one of the biggest factors in special education is parents understanding their rights under the law. And we have a very highly educated community, and our parents understand what the expectation is to provide for their children. And that's what we do. We provide what we need to under the law, and that's what everybody's supposed to be doing. Unfortunately, if you look at especially more impoverished areas where their community is not as highly educated about federal law and their children, and they don't have those resources, they often don't ask those school districts. If they do, generally, if they end up in court, they will win. In Fairfield, we have outstanding staff, but we also have parents that understand what the expectation is for us, and that's exactly what we provide, is what we're expected to under the law.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, and I understand your answer. So do you have certain metrics that you can look at to show that you're providing what you're required to provide under the law? How does that, I understand what Mr. Flynn's asking. I can see where maybe something crosses the line, or maybe it doesn't, maybe it never does. So how, you say we provide services according to the law. How do you know that? And if someone complains, how do you defend yourself? That's the question.
That's an excellent question, because Dr. Jones is right. We do have an extremely educated parent population who are very savvy, and they know what their rights are. They know what their children's rights are. They know what our obligations under the IDEA is. If we do come to an impasse, and at times we do, there is a mechanism in place. Parents can file for due process through the State Department of Education. The district can file for due process through the State Department of Education if we feel that we're being denied parental consent to complete, what we feel is an appropriate, set of evaluations, for example, so we can get more information to program for our kid appropriately. Through that process, we often end up going to mediation because it's less expensive. We try to resolve our differences before going through a due process hearing. Sometimes we're able to do that. Most often we are. Sometimes we're not. And then we have to go through a due process hearing, which is a legal proceeding where there are attorneys involved. Costs can rise quickly into the tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more. So, we try to work with our families who regularly have legal representation with them to resolve differences so we can continue to amicably and collaboratively work together on behalf of their child.
Cool. Thank you. Mrs. Esmond.
Does the school system collaborate at all with Fairfield Counseling Services? Would that be considered, and if so, is that considered in-house or outplacement, or where does that fall?
Being new to the district, Fairfield County Services, Counseling Services, I'm assuming is a community-based resource for families that we probably do collaborate with and hook families up with. All community service agencies or providers for families we have some kind of relationship with that we hook families up with. And a lot of times families will call us and ask us where to turn for additional support outside of the school.
Yeah, they're right here, you know. Thank you.
Anybody else on this topic? So, and staff as a whole, if I read this correctly.
I had a
Oh,
I have
I'm
a
sorry,
staffing
Mr.
question.
Kiley. Yeah, go right ahead.
Did you? Thanks. Thank you, sir. I have a question concerned about staff turnover. Not the 19 people that we've talked about that you can calculate, the retirements and the replacements and the straight math, but what I would call the turnover at the mid-career level. And I've seen some data that indicates that the percentage of teachers, professional staff, that are leaving our district is on the increase. So I wanted to make sure that that's accurate and to what degree. And if it is accurate, can you give me your view on, what it means? Obviously there's a financial component. When somebody leaves, we save a couple bucks on the salary line, so that might be considered good, right? But the other piece of it, what does it mean to the school? What does it mean to the district, to the quality of schools? And what might be causing it, and what might we do about it?
Unfortunately, historically, we haven't done a great job of tracking this in-house. We have data on it going back the last 3 years, but not beyond that. So in terms of a trend, I don't have good information for you on that.
Is it up in the recent 2-3 years?
So I can tell you that 3 years ago, for the 2015 to 2016 school year, we had 43 teachers leave or retire. In the 16-17 school year, we had 27 teachers leave or retire. And then in the 17-18 school year, we went up to 58 teachers who either left the district or they retired. A significant number of those in each year were in the areas that are designated by the state as shortage areas for certified teachers. It's the areas where there are just going to be fewer bodies who are certified to be in the positions that exist in each district. So those categories are science, math, special education, English as a second language, world languages, and areas such as those. So, for example, the year that we had 27 teachers leave, the 16-17 school year, 11 of those were special education or special services providers. 3 were math, 5 were science, and 4 were world language. So only a handful were actually classroom teachers or English or social studies teachers, where it is easier to fill those positions. What that means for us is that positions stay open longer than we'd like them to. We had a physics teacher leave mid-year this year at the high school level who left to pursue another opportunity outside of teaching, because when you're a physics certified person, you have skill sets that allow you to work in other industries quite easily, and so he left to do that. At this point, we've been searching for someone to fill that position for over 2 months. We finally found someone, but they can't start for another 30 days. So at this point, it's going to be about 3 months where that position is open and we're left with a long-term sub. So when these positions that are in shortage areas are teachers leave for other districts, for other opportunities, or they retire, it means for us there is some difficulty oftentimes in filling those spots.
Okay. So, if I may?
Yeah.
The numbers you mentioned, they included the retirements, right?
Correct.
So my question is, the other number without the retirements. And within those numbers alone, is there a trend? And if there is a trend, what does it mean? And if it means something significant, what can we do about it? So you may not have that answer right now, but this conversation came up the night of the RTM meeting when we were talking about the contract a couple of weeks back, right? And I heard some conversation about it on the floor that night, and I've seen some data that, unless I read it wrong, indicated that there was an increasing percentage of teachers that were leaving mid-career, and I thought that was odd, so I just wanted to follow up on that and see if we had any clarity on it.
I'd love to know where you got your data from. I have a feeling it was probably from the FEA, the teachers union, and I think that they do have data indicating that. Unfortunately, it's not our data from our office, so I can't stand behind how valid it is. I do know that they have it.
And to follow up, the issue is going across the teaching profession too, right? So I'd be interested, the real relevant is, where are we standing as compared to everybody else?
Absolutely.
Because there's a ton of people leaving, sadly, the teaching profession because of everything going on there, right?
And you, that's correct. So Dr. Jones, in your presentation, you said, and I think you said in quotes, it's hard to be a teacher, unquote. And I know, my father was a teacher in this district for a million years, and I understand it's hard to be a teacher for a variety of reasons. Why is it harder to be a teacher today than it was 15 or 20 years ago?
Wow, that's a big question. There's just so many reasons. The expectations are often unrealistic that we have for teachers. The pressure to perform on assessments, but then also make sure that children are in lovely, rich, active learning environments, and we don't want to do the drill worksheet to prepare for assessments. That's a lot of pressure on teachers. Right now, it's also there are safety concerns for teachers that I think we've never quite felt as heightened as it is right now. That's very different. The pressure to be able to be everything for all children. You know, we just spent probably, 20-odd minutes talking about mental health services. If you go back 20 years ago, we didn't ask teachers and administrators to teach all of the curriculum components that we do. You know, we do suicide awareness, we're doing drug awareness, it's just unlimited what teachers are asked to do, and they work phenomenal hours. And I think people often don't realize that teachers are only paid for the days they work. They are on a contract. They're not paid for winter break. They're not paid for spring break. They're not paid for summer. Their daily rate of pay, they're paid for their contracted days. And they do work long hours. They have contracted times, but I mean, when I'm out in buildings, it's not unusual to see a teacher at, 6 or 7. They're still in their room. I happen to be married to a teacher, so I have probably that view. He is a physics teacher, but the amount of grading that a teacher has to do to be able to give quality feedback. If you're a great teacher, you don't just give kids multiple choice assessment. You want to give them really authentic feedback, which means that if you think about an English teacher, if the students are going to have high quality essays and they're going to turn those in and they've spent hours, they want high quality feedback. Well, one essay could take a teacher a half an hour easily to give high quality feedback. Well, when you do that 100 times, and it's, whether that's winter break or spring break, that's often what teachers are doing. So that's just a very small sliver, but it has definitely changed in the last 20 years. You go back 20 years ago and AP barely even existed at all.
I think you raised an excellent point on that, and it goes kind of to my earlier question is, we're getting the school system involved in all these other areas and all these other aspects. And teachers in specific. And my mother was a teacher for 35 years. And, you just talked about the emotional issues that you're dealing with and some of those things that maybe they were present 25, 30 years ago, but they weren't being addressed by the school system for whatever reason, and rightfully or wrongfully. That's not a qualitative assessment. That's just a statement that we're asking them to do a lot more now than we did 20 or 30 years ago. I also hear a lot from teachers regarding the amount of computer work they're required to do now and filling out paperwork and forms each and every night. And I know that takes a fair amount of time and stress on behalf of the teachers.
That you're correct. State reporting has become unbelievable. All those mandates that you ask about, most of those we report on those, and everything is computer based, and attendance is calculated. Every block, every period, grades, their transcripts are so important for kids applying for college. It's all automated. That is a whole nother layer that you go back 20, 25 years ago, it wasn't there.
I'm going to go to Mrs. LeClaire, who's been waiting patiently.
It was a question relating to the staff turnover. And is the Board of Ed staff turnover related at all to contract negotiations, in that we had a discussion on the town side that if if a contract hasn't been negotiated currently, or they're waiting to see what the new contract is, and then once the new one's negotiated, then they can leave, so they get any increase or anything that they would have been due in that time period?
I don't have any data that can speak to that directly, unfortunately, because our data about teacher turnover does go back 3 years, which is when the last contract finished and this current contract started. So it doesn't coincide with anything that I could match up.
Well, with the teacher contracts, they're pretty much done in a timely manner. But I don't know about the other contracts.
Do the 1,000 certified staff, there's a very tight time frame, so I think the same dynamic doesn't happen. You're probably asking about the 400 non-certified staff, and we experience the same thing where sometimes a contract can take 2 years or more to settle, and whether we see more turnover among the non-certified staff because of that is, I think, your question.
And I don't have a better answer for you now that it's clarified. We don't have data on that specifically, though, again, I think it's very possible that does affect the non-certified staff when their contracts are allowed to lapse and they're allowed to go a year or two without a raise.
And then my second question is there any way that you can, the next contract negotiation, which will be for 3 years, but can you negotiate a stipend or a higher increase for physics teachers and hard-to-fill positions?
We could try. I don't know how advisable that would be. It would really result in several problems just off the top of my head. One being with all the other staff who don't get those bonuses or stipends for not being in the shortage area. The shortage area changes every year as it's decided by the state when they really look at the numbers about where the actual shortages exist. And I think that would also result in us having potential issues with our neighbors if they started doing the same thing in terms of raising their own stipends for shortage area employees. So
That's the economy when that happens.
Right.
By the way, I know of a new physics teacher who's going to be around soon, right? Go ahead,
Isn't that
Mr.
like
Walsh.
real world? Like,
Right.
You know, we have doctors out there in the community, in this community, and some have specialties that get paid more than other specialties. Just like we have in my profession, certain specialties pay more. I can't get any closer than I have it to me right now.
Different microphone.
Jim, is your mic on?
I don't know if Jerry turned it on.
Here, go ahead, use this one.
It's not, doesn't have a green light, Jerry. So is it on?
I don't know, I can't tell from
It doesn't have a green light.
Mr. Mayor, can we grab yours?
Have a lot to say tonight.
Oh, no, wait.
Hold it.
We're doing your job for you, Jim. No.
Technician is
This is.
I'm sure he's got to show me up.
The green light's off.
We definitely don't want Jim Walsh without a microphone.
That's true. I don't speak very loudly.
Can we take a vote on that?
Go ahead.
My point being that in every profession in this town that we all choose to go into, certain parts of that profession get paid more for different specialties that are out there. And sometimes they're extra training, and sometimes they're just a more popular field. And I think if the economy's going there, we may have to go to such a model. Meaning that if a teacher wants to make more money and we are paying more for physics teachers, there's nothing stopping, it's a free market society, they can become a specialist in physics or another math profession or another science, or if it becomes, like you said, it could trend year to year, a Spanish teacher. Someone can go get extra training, become a Spanish teacher if that's what they desire, if they're trying to seek out money. I mean, in my profession, you can become a mergers and acquisition attorney, make a hell of a lot more than some other professions, parts of my profession.
And I think we do that to a large degree in education. A superintendent makes more than her executive directors. The executive directors make more than the headmasters. I mean, we're all specialties within what we do and take on different responsibilities. And for a teacher who really wants to grow in their field, a lot of them will become principals. That's, what they aspire to be, is to actually run a building. When you talk about getting into paying a physics teacher more, doesn't mean you can't. And there are, places in the country where they'll do a recruiting bonus, for instance. But you just have it has to be very thoughtful. It's not something that we've looked at, but it doesn't mean that, going forward, it's not something we won't have to look at, because right now, not having a physics teacher in a high school like Fairfield Ludlow High School is not okay.
Right.
We have kids who are not getting their physics, and we literally couldn't find somebody physics certified. But I do think it's, in special education, it's the same way. We actually, last year, mid-year, lost, throughout the year, probably at least 5 teachers in the middle of the year. And that they're very difficult to replace. But we are looking at all of that right now, I guess is what I'm saying. And the shortage right now depends on what part of the country you're in, what kind of shortage you're seeing. And I would say in this area, it's some of the hardest, special education, math, and science.
Well, the market, that's the point. The market's going to dictate what you're going to have to do in order to attract that talent eventually, right? Which is your point.
And we are also a bargaining state, so I remind you that. We also don't want to go down an avenue where we also end up in some sort of legal aspect because we've done something with hiring practice that we're not allowed to do because technically they're all teachers. So we just need to be very thoughtful if in the future we have to look at that.
Do any towns within Fairfield County pay bonuses, stipends, any type of level?
Not to my knowledge.
I thought
believe so.
Bridgeport does when they were having problems finding physics and science teachers. I thought they paid them more, and they had the ability to be able to do that. I mean, so when I ask you, I wanted you to speak from knowledge and not just be guessing.
Sure, and what I can tell you that I do know districts do is that they will place teachers differently on their experience grid than the teachers necessarily have the years of experience in reality. So if someone has 5 years of experience, Bridgeport might look at them and say, we'll put you at someone who's 9 years of experience, where we would look at them and we would say, you have 5, we'll put you on 5. So we really try to treat our teachers fairly and equally to each other, but another district might not take the same approach.
So that is a form of a bonus system, because you're paying somebody for a higher, you're basically raising their salary in a specific branch or specialty area because you're having trouble bringing them in, correct?
Correct. We do have a policy, actually, that does give the superintendent the ability to look at that as an option to recruit the person they want. So, I mean, the policy allows for that here in Fairfield. We may not have to do it as often as Bridgeport does.
Have we ever done it?
It's usually giving experience for work experience that's not as an educator. So they've been out, if they're scientists and they've been out working in a lab for 5 years or 7 years. You may have another example. We had a couple this year where we had to look, our family consumer science was somebody who was very active in the field but was relatively new to the teaching profession, but extremely experienced.
Is that because of their experience or because we're trying to attract talent? Are we trying to attract people by doing that, or are we just saying, okay, we're looking at you as a whole person, or are we saying, hey, we really want this science teacher, so you know what? They did 4 years of post-grad work in a physics program. Maybe they didn't get a doctorate degree, so we're going to give them 4 years worth of experience and raise them up the scale of our pay.
And it's really on a case-by-case basis, so it would depend on the person, the reasons for trying to recruit them, and what their experience might be that we're looking at.
We do feel like we have to be able to validate that because we have physics teachers that have been with us. So you also want to be respectful that you can't bring somebody in who's a first-year teacher. You could, but to bring somebody in who's and put them on step 15, and our teachers who have been with us are sitting at step 6 because that's where they are, because they will very quickly probably walk out the door and go see if they can get a job in Greenwich or Westport if we treat them that way. So we're very mindful and respectful to our staff on how we place.
Ms. Marmy, is it on this point specific?
It is. I was just going to echo that this could be very demoralizing to our teachers. You've got a physics teacher versus that English teacher you were talking about who's grading those papers, ad nauseum on the weekends and during vacation. You really have to be careful. I'd also argue that this is, this has nothing to do with this year's budget, so I don't know how germane it is.
Thank you, Ms.
Doc, you answered my question. So you basically have some discretion that you have to exercise reasonably and responsibly, basically.
So who's gonna, David, please.
I mean,
Mr. Becker.
so if you have a teacher that is going to leave and go to another district, like the mid-year teacher perhaps, right? Now now we have a vacancy for 3 months, right smack in the middle of the school year. You can't, say you knew what they were going to leave, they were going to go to another district, they were going to get maybe one extra step or the equivalent of one extra step. One of the problems you have is you can't even bump them a step and say, okay, I fixed my problem. You have to literally watch them walk out the door. Although in the future, let's say, let's say in a year or two they want to apply to come back because you still have your shortage all over the place, you then can look at other factors perhaps and try to match out to get them. But they've got to actually leave before you can even have that conversation.
And that was, I'm worried that we are going off course at this point, but that was one of our concerns about a step freeze, is that it would allow teachers to leave and go to another district and then come back and make more than the people who have been loyal to us and stayed with us. So that is something that we have considered, and it is something that could possibly happen.
I just have one quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to roll back the clock like 15 minutes ago. You said 58 teachers left last year. How many of those were planned retirements versus leave? Again, can you just give me that number?
Yeah, I will.
That was my original question.
Yeah. So it was 58 teachers left, and 23 of them were retirements.
58 left and 23 retired.
Yes. So
35 left.
correct.
Got it.
All right, let's get back. I just want to do this volume analysis real quick. This is the biggest part of the budget, so it's the most important part, right? But if I'm reading this correctly, it says that your head count is going up by 20 year over year. So the roll forward would be, we started at 1445 or 1503. I'll include the grantees, right? We've planned for 19 retirements. We've planned to replace those retirements, and then we plan to hire 20 more staff, so that the ending balance would be 15, 2350, right? I'm on page 147.
147, thank you.
Yeah.
That's right.
So what's our enrollment supposed to do again?
You're on 147.
I am.
Yeah.
I just did the math in my, based on the data that you guys gave me, right?
So what I can tell you is that our enrollment is going to dip slightly, and we are eliminating 3 elementary classrooms in the budget for next year.
Okay, so I'll give you the benefit of because you say slightly, you're basically saying, hey, our enrollment's flat.
In terms of, it will go down, but not enough to eliminate more than those 3 elementary classrooms.
Understand. But we're going up by 20.
Correct.
So, and I understand, we talked a little bit about the the 5 we're bringing in. Where's the other 15?
So back on page 138.
Yep, looked at it.
Yep. So the 20 there, it's 9 teachers and 11 non-certified staff, all of whom are paraprofessionals.
Right.
So more than half of those 20 that we're bringing in are non-certified staff to support the programs that we are creating for next year. And all of these are the creation of new programs or initiatives.
Okay, so what is the deal with the new initiatives? What are we doing there? These have all been vetted by the Board of Education. They've all been passed by the Board of Education. The Board of Education is saying we need these programs.
So They're almost entirely, with the exception of, you'll see the STEAM and gifted teacher is 6.1. It's almost entirely special education programs, with the exception of that 6.1 for STEAM or gifted. The elementary program facilitator, that's going to be a full-time staff member in each of the elementary schools, working to support special education, SRBI, and other programming on student-driven needs.
So what is our level of special education? In other words, we had X number of children receiving special education benefits last year. Are you increasing that by how many children? Like what's going on there that's driving the fact that we're adding 20 positions that are all, I get we don't need to revisit the 5.
Right.
Right? But what about the rest?
Can I speak? Okay. Hello.
Hello.
One of the other things that I was speaking about when I was last up here is a couple of our other program initiatives. We're looking to develop a CLC, a complex learning cohort, for some of our most impaired students at Tomlinson Middle School. It's the only middle school that does not have a complex learner cohort at their school, so it forces students within the Tomlinson feeder pattern who need that intensity of service to have to go to Woods or to Roger Ludlow. We're working with families right now to bring 2 students back from out of district.
Can I ask a question? Are they getting those services right now at Woods or Ludlow?
Their numbers are full, and there are a couple of students that we're looking to bring back from out of district to program for them at Tomlinson, and there is one student at Tomlinson who they're currently programming for, but because the family wants the student to stay at their home school, they need a level of support that is similar to what we provide our CLC students at Roger Ludlow or at Woods.
So the answer I'm just not following. Are there going to be more children receiving these CLC?
Yes. Yes.
How many more?
Well, we're looking to start with 3 to start the program. The program max we like to keep at 8 because we find that over 8 it becomes it's difficult to manage because the needs of these students is significant. Many of them have feeding needs. Many of them have toileting needs. They have communication needs. They may be nonverbal. They may be non-ambulatory. So there are students with the most significant needs.
Right.
And we find that
So where are these students now?
The 2 students that we're looking to bring back, they're at out-of-district facilities.
So they're at out-of-district facilities. So is this only 2 new students that you're bringing back?
Plus one at Tomlinson. So let's just start with 3.
And if I might add, what happens with these programs is over time, you usually like your program to sit between 5 and 6 students, because that way when you enroll the next student who moves into the district or the next one, when they hit 8, when we start getting 8 students, we have to start looking at another program. That's where we are in middle school right now. With our numbers, we're either going to have CLC classes which are too large for us to meet the needs of children, not only space-wise, but just to meet the needs of the children. It's time to add another program. And this is a CLC program. We're going to house it at Tomlinson, which we're happy to be able to offer that to the families that that's their school, but we need the 3rd CLC setting.
Mr. Walsh, and then I'll go to Mr. Mottola.
The one student you're talking about at Tomlinson, they're there at Tomlinson because that's where the family wants them to be?
That's where we're programming for the family in their home school.
Okay, but we have to provide the program, not the location, right?
I would not say we're providing the program. They understand that the direction the district wants to move in terms of providing a CLC at Tomlinson. It's the only middle school that doesn't have a CLC. I believe students should be able to stay within their home schools with their friends and their peers. So that's why we're working with families. And our numbers are increasing. And we believe that over time, we can provide a higher quality program than we pay for our expensive out-of-district programs.
Can you get to us, you might not have the number here today, the two people that are out of district now that you're paying for, that you're bringing back, can you tell us what the yearly cost for that was? Or you anticipate it to be? And show me where in the numbers on the out of placement, your numbers are going to be going down because you're bringing those two students back in.
Yeah, let me just actually say no, very quick, in that it's to be a FERPA violation to do so, and because we can't give you actual information on specific students, and especially in programs that have 6 and 8 children. But what I can say is we can tell you this is the number of students we anticipate next year. That gets us back to 6, 6, and 6 in our 3 programs, so that we don't have 18, 9 in each program, which is too large, and that's why we need the CLC.
Okay, how can I see the number going down in the out of placements for next year if you're planning on bringing 2 back in?
I wish that I could say you definitely will see that, but without looking at individual students, you may or may not, because we may have 2 more students who get outplaced that move into us. We were in discussion today of one of our students who's coming back, but we have another student from another district where the family is moving in.
So how did you build the budget?
How'd you build the
We
budget?
build the budget by looking at who we actually have currently, and it is very difficult, and I will say,
Did you build in the savings, or because you just said, hey, we're not counting on the savings because we're not sure that somebody, so is there savings built in or no?
What page are you talking about, sir?
I don't know, you're going to have to
Anywhere
tell
in the budget.
yes,
anywhere
what
in
we
the
do
budget.
is we go in and we look at actual students, but I can tell you that it changes from October to June.
Totally
And
understand
generally,
that.
that's why in the last 2 years I've been in front of you saying we're $1 million short. We don't usually have a luxury to say with our outplacement tuition it's going to be under. So we look at actuals. We have not brought those 2 students back yet. We are anticipating, we're working with families, but until the day they show up. But again, we're probably going to have 5 more that may move in and need a different level of service. So we do the best that we can with actuals. When we get into April, we're going to look at our actuals again, and there's a sheet in here that talks about outplacement, talks about unilateral placements.
I understand that. So what's the budget assumption, though? So I understand exactly what you're saying about how it changes.
We don't make special education decisions for programming based on trying to save money off of children. We look at exactly what we need for our children, and then we program accordingly. So will we see cost savings? We are hopeful that our programming is going to be able to keep more children in our district. We hope that we will see that. We have not seen that over the last 2 or 3 years. We were hoping that ESS at high school, we were going to see that trend reverse a little bit. We haven't. Mr. Mancusi and I have probably spent no less than, 60 hours just working on this one component, trying to see if next year we can actually be able to see that trend in the budget in the future, where our outplacements, our kids are staying with us and we're not having to outplace, and that number's not growing. But we have not had that trend in the last couple of years.
But what's the, and again, I appreciate everything you just said, and nobody's saying you're balancing the budget on the backs of the kids and you're not trying to deliver the program or anything like that. What we're talking about is what's the budget assumption? Did we assume that the number of outplacements were going to remain the same year after year, regardless of the fact that we're bringing a couple back in?
What we do is when we project our outplacements from one year to the next, when we give our initial projection in November, say, we factor out, the students who are going to age out. They're going to turn 21 that school year, and we're no longer going to be responsible for them.
Sure.
The students who graduate, and then we see who's maybe ready to come back from out of district, and we calculate what we have coming up from each level, from the ECC, and that's how we come up with our initial
I get it.
number.
And it sounds very thorough. So the question is, did you assume that it was going to be roughly the same number of outplacements year over year? That's the only question.
I don't think you can assume that you're going to have the same outplacements every year, because every year could be different. You could have a year where
I understand, but what's the assumption here? Because there was an assumption made in preparation of the budget, right? That's all I'm saying.
So
I'm not saying
look
you-
on page 152. This may not help for this year, but in talking quickly with my superintendent, are you on 152?
Yep.
So 102 is the number of students that we are projecting for the 18-19 year, which is roughly what we have today, correct?
So this number didn't change year over year? We
So-
had 102 last year and we have 102 this year?
So I think it's not unlike the English language learners, where the graph showed that we only grew by 10, but in reality, we have, I think you said 45 new students in. So we can look at taking this page and perhaps adapting it to say, okay, how many are no longer needing to be serviced, they aged out, or they no longer need to be outplaced, we've been able to bring them back in, and then how many new students do we have to serve because they came to the district since the budget was put together. The need was identified halfway through the year that we're not really serving them well in the district, so we have to place them out, and then have another column that says, therefore, the net of those two, here's what we're expecting for the following year. That might help you, Mr. Flynn, to get to where you're trying to get to for the next year's budget.
Yeah, thank you. I was just looking at what was the assumption, that's all. I wasn't,
And-
questioning the buildup of it or how it was, I was just saying, what's the assumption?
Yeah, and this page says the assumption is 102 students, which is essentially what we have now.
Mr.
Yeah,
Wells?
what I'm having a hard time grasping is you're building a program and you want us to make a significant investment in a new program that it will have a capacity of 8, correct? Correct. You only anticipate, though, having 3, right?
It's not actually a new and I'm sorry, I don't mean to
No,
be,
it's a
I
new
just want to make
program
sure you
at that
understand.
school.
It's just an additional class.
You want to build additional capacity by a third by having it at Tomlinson Middle School, where it's not currently. It's at the other 2 middle schools. It's up to a capacity of 8, and now you want to bring that same capacity and that program to Tomlinson for a total capacity of 8, knowing that you have 1 there and you can bring 2 out back.
Knowing that in the 2 programs that we have right now, their numbers are already over, and they're sitting at 9, I believe, and we could double-check those numbers again for you, but the numbers are already over the capacity, so you have to add another program when you get to that point.
All right, but are those, when you say they're over capacity, I also heard this gentleman say that he wants to keep them in their home school. Are there other students at Tomlinson that you're going to be bringing back into this school other than the 2 that are coming out of district?
I will have to speak to my coordinator on the specifics of other potential students. What I will say is when you stretch the capacity of a program, such as a complex learner cohort program, which is the most, disabled kids that we program for in district, the capacity to program for more than 8 kids is significantly compromised, and that's when it will lead. Yeah, it's significantly compromised. It's not safe, and then that's when the integrity of the program deteriorates, and then, ultimately parents may no longer want their students there or their children there. They may unilaterally place, and then that starts the whole.
And I understand that, but I want to understand a couple things. The students say that are at Ludlow Middle School, and that's over capacity, correct? Are those students that are supposed to go to Ludlow Middle School?
Most of them, yes.
Okay, so under your definition from earlier, you believe, as the director of the program, that they should stay at Ludlow Middle School, even at overcapacity, because you think that they have a right to stay in their home district. So you will keep them there, correct?
We work with our families to make sure that programs are appropriately provided. We do not want to keep students in programs where the capacity of the staff or of the program is compromised because of the enrollment.
Okay. The question, I guess, is, are there going to be a capacity of 8 at Tomlinson now? And only have 3 people there? 3 students?
But their staffing would also be
Yeah. Yeah, initially we're going to staff for 3.
Okay, and that's what this new staffing amounts for, to staff for 3?
This staffing is reflective of having, is it 4 paras? I believe it's 4, which would be 4 students and then the teacher.
So it'd
And
be-
are you checking that, Mr. Mancusi?
So it'd be the one that you know about, and the 2 that you know about that are out of district.
We have
plus 1 extra capacity in case someone.
Well, and again, to talk about individual students, we'd have to go and look at that, but I know that we have planned for what we expect.
It's 3 paraprofessionals and 1 ed trainer.
Okay. And the question I have is, I understand you wanting to build that capacity, But the question I have is, you know 2 are coming out of district, and I don't see your numbers taking that into account.
They are taking that into account, and when we put that chart together on page 152, we go through every line and try to anticipate. We have students right now who are in conversation, for instance, with our special education team that we, and especially at the beginning of the year when we do this chart for the budget, that we know are going to be outplaced, for instance. So they're calculated in here. If they are graduating, they're calculated in here. We do the very best we can at this point in time to try to make sure that we have looked at each one of these line items. So yes, they are reflected in here to the very best of our ability, but it changes from September through June. And so this is something we're doing every month.
So this 102, despite this same number from last year, what then I'm hearing from you is that you know these 2 students are coming back into district if we set up this program, but there must be 2 other students that you are anticipating will need services to raise the number back to 102, and it just coincidentally is the same.
Yeah, those students that I said that we're working with families to bring back to Tomlinson, that's not part of the 102. Those were 2 that were, when we were calculating this, we were counting them on coming back because we're in constant conversation with our families on who are potential returns to district. With my team, I review our outplaced list almost weekly, so we're in constant contact with families and with our outplaced facilities to keep track of our student progress.
So when you came up with the 102, you did not know that these 2 might be coming back into district? Am I saying that correctly?
102 is what we expect.
What we expect. But those 2, are not part of this because we're planning on them being ready to come back at the end of it.
So my
Not
position.
104.
It's not 104. I'm sorry.
Okay, but there was 104 that you were anticipating until then you knew you were going to bring these back in by that program, so it reduced back down to 102.
There was probably more than that because we have seniors who are graduating. We literally have to go student by student to get this number.
Okay, so after all that analysis, it's just a coincidence that it's the exact same number as last year.
As last year, as in?
Last year's budget. I thought the number was this 102 last year as well.
It's not the same as last year's budget.
Oh, Mr. Dwyer said that number was exactly the same. It was 102
I did not
last
say
year.
that, Mr. Walsh.
Did anybody else hear that?
So what I said is what we have now. Last year's budget, if you look at the budget book, you'll find that that 102 number was quite a bit less. Historically, this district had used a number on that page that stayed the same, regardless of how many students we had in outplacement. It just kind of stayed the same on that page from one year to the next. When our new superintendent came in and our new executive director of special ed came in and took a analysis of the outplacement students, found that those historical numbers sometimes were spot on and sometimes were not. I think in the quarterly review, probably the line that is the most consistent that Mrs. Munsell puts in there is special education is the most volatile expense item that we have. We can have a 4-student increase that creates dramatic expenses, and we might not have known about them in June, but they show up in September because of the identified needs that they have. And so, yes, there was a...
So did this 102 increase from last year or decrease from last year?
If you look in last year's budget book on page 150, and we can get you a copy of that, the projected number was 80. And that was been one of my concerns is that last year when I started in December, and then of course this year, is that
So
our
this wasn't the same number.
our projections were lower, which is causing us to be over $1 million in the hole in the middle of the year. And so we're trying to, when Mr. Mancusi came in, we literally are going student by student and looking at that. So this year, that 102 is what is an actual projection, going student by student, backing out all students who are graduating, looking at the students who are in the little ones that we know are in the pipeline that are going to be in this number next year. So no, it is a different, the number is different because it's actually what we projected.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I mean, and we're kind of getting someplace now. So that's good to know. On that page 152, when you have the 102, what is that number, the net projected cost, compared to from the previous year? What did you budget last year in that area? Because you said you budgeted about,
Sorry.
did you say 80 or 90 last year? 80. So you went up by 202 students in out-of-district placement.
Not 202.
I'm sorry, 102, and it was last year 80. So you went up by 22 students.
It's okay, math isn't good, your strong suit.
No. Cross-exam is.
Last year's budget was about $4.5 million.
4.5. So the $9 million number, $9,371,880, was approximately $4.5 million?
Where are you?
I'm on page 52,
152.
and if I go to
152.
next to the number where it says 102 in this year's book, the gross projected tuition of 102 students for out-of-district placement, it now says that your projected tuition's $9,371,880.
Let us find it on the actual line item.
Sure. We're currently on page 152 this year. I don't know, I don't have last year's budget.
Isn't the better question, what have you actually spent this year?
Yeah, and
Because-
they're looking, that's a supplemental,
Both things, we want to know both things, because they're comparing it to budget, but you're absolutely right, John.
that's a supplemental information page. They're looking for the actual budget page that has the last year's budget, this year's projected actual, and next year's budget. I think that's the best line to kind of get from budget to actual to next year's budget.
Yeah, it is different. I mean, well, it's,
What page?
Does this one have the excess cost in there as well?
these aren't
on
the
that one?
exact same
Could
numbers.
that be
I mean,
throwing them off
close.
as well?
But it's not the exact same.
Yeah, we're on 87. Do you want to try to enter the excess cost piece?
Would this all be, Jim raises a good question, Mr. Brown raises a good question. Would this expense be seen in your tuition line? Is that where it would be seen?
On page 87?
Well, just a global in that, would the cost for the outplacements all be in the tuition line?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So this is interesting, because if you go to page 27 then,
But now on the tuition, if you're looking on page 87 where you have,
27.
oh, 27. 27, if it's just the tuition line, that would also include our magnet. Is that, yes?
Yeah, no, I get it.
Okay.
But I'm looking at it, and it would, I'm presuming, be the net cost, right? It would be the net cost that would be reflective in that tuition line, I would guess, net of the excess cost, yeah. Because when I look at it, what's interesting is, and bear with me for a second, if you go to the last year's budget, that tuition line is $5,247,000. Now, presumably that $5,247,000, I know there's other things in there, right? You just said that, so but I get it. It's $5,247,000, so the vast majority of it has to be this outplacement tuition, right? That would be based on last year. That would be based on 80 outplacements, based on what you just said as to what was in last year's budget. Then you're saying that actually it was based on, it came up to $6,667,000, right? That's what you're, $6,671,000, 672 if I round it, right? Then you're saying that the proposed for this year is $5,902,000, right, on that tuition line. Why wouldn't it be more if you're going from 80 to 102? And what I'm presuming is,
Why is it not going to the $9 million number?
well, because there's a reimbursement of the excess cost sharing. So I'm just trying to like wrap my arms around the fact that, okay, the budget was this and it's 5 million something. The actual, let's say, because we have a new director of special ed and you guys spent 60 hours and you cranked it out, you found out that it's 102, right? And then you come back and you say, hey, we're only going to be 5.9 this year, right, at 102. But that same 102, if I'm to hear what Mr. Dwyer was saying, that was really 102 all along, it's just not reflected in last year's budget book because the work hadn't been done. Now the work's done, it's 102. Why is the number different this year? And it's
so-
actually going down.
And so that is like an hour ago answer, which you might recall, which was a budget reclassification. So I'll have
Okay.
Dr. Jones remind you of that, what we did with excess
It's only
cost.
$500,000, big deal. We're talking 20 kids. And thanks for the reminder about an hour ago.
You're talking $1.4 million difference.
Right.
Of excess
Six
cost.
Oh, but I'm saying the
But
reclass
the
is only
$6.6
$500,000.
million estimate
From
for
an
the
hour
end.
ago, and I do remember it.
The $6.6 million for the end of this year estimate should be the same number for this year if you're already talking about 102 kids in the system,
Right.
right? It shouldn't be any less than that, you'd think.
Except for the reclass.
So you're, okay, 500, the tuition went from 5.2 to an actual estimated expense of 6.6. So let's just say in your budget, you said there's 80 kids, and your estimated actual today, let's just assume for a minute, that's 102 kids, right? If you take out 500,000, or whatever the reclassification, shouldn't that be at least the least number?
I'm not sure that this is going to simplify it, but if you think about that 5.2 number and divide that by 80, divide the 6.6 by the 105, you're going to see you get almost the same number because of the number of students that we were under projected for this school year.
Right. So what's going on
So why is
this
your
year?
budget 1 point?
What I could say is, in terms of excess cost reimbursement that's going to be applied to the 18-19 budget is $3.986 million because it's all going toward tuition. Last year, when it was split between OT, PT, contracted services, tuition, and some other accounts, we applied toward tuition. Our excess cost was $2.127 million. So we're applying almost $1.8 million more from the excess cost grant just to tuitions, and we're not distributed among the other accounts.
So the real reclass is 1.8 million, not 500,000. Is that a fair statement?
And we have a question and answer that we gave to the board because one of the board members was confused by that as well. And that's part of that excess cost change that's hard to follow, where if you look at the gross amount of tuition, you can actually see it. So we'll be sure and get you that question and answer.
That'd be fantastic. And is the reclass 1.8 million as opposed to?
Yeah,
500,000?
last year, our excess costs that we, for 16-17, what we received was 3.2 million compared to what it's 3.9 million, almost 4 million, actually. So there's your difference.
But it's all applied.
It's all applied to tuitions.
It's all applied. Yeah, we'd
instead
love
of-
to see that reconciliation, to see this. That's on, yeah, exactly
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Thank you. All right, anything else on staff salaries right now? It's the biggest line item in the budget, right? All right, if not, I'm going to propose we take a 5-minute break. It's 9:30, and then we'll continue on. And thank you very much for your patience with answering our questions.